Good everyone. I hope you guys have an amazing day. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to talk with you guys about the carbon credit and how to set it up in Net Zero Cloud. So instead of creating a slide, I thought I might as well teach you guys from a trailhead. It's pretty simple, nothing fancy about it, right? It's just an introduction to the carbon credits. If you remember, I did mention about the carbon credits, right? So, which is a good way to offset your emission. So, say for instance, if you're a company wanted to track, your carbon credits or carbon emissions and wanted to go net zero, right? Say, you wanted to track. Uh, Emissions like whether you're using uh, energy supplied by fossil fuel or whether you are moving to energy supplied by using the natural gas. You can keep track of all of these things in Net Zero Cloud, which is pretty cool. But sometimes what happens is that you might have certain kind of emissions which is totally unavoidable. Okay, so something which you can't avoid it for whatever reason. So to offset that, you can buy something called carbon credits. So carbon credits, if you look here, if you scroll down, right? So the carbon credits could be something you can buy a carbon project which say, for instance, part of a project which involves, planting trees. Okay, so the more trees you plant, the more it's good for the planet, right? Because what happens is that obviously, if you are a company who's emitting, CO2 or other stuff to the atmosphere, and for whatever reason you can't um, reduce for whatever reason, right? So you need to get involved in another way so that that gets offset, right? So, like I said, you can go to renewable source of energy, which is more efficient. But that being said, there are different arguments, though, right? I do understand that there are pros and cons, right? Some people are pretty skeptic, and they say, "Oh, renewable energy is very expensive; it will not meet every country demand." Yes, I do understand that. There is such kind of uh, there might be a possibility, right, where renewable energy will not do the job alone. You might have other sources to compensate that, but that does not mean that we can't, go net zero. Like for instance, countries like India and China, they got like 3 billion plus combined population. So the energy needs for those countries very different to say energy need for New Zealand, where we got like 5 million people, or energy need say of Australia, okay, or say Denmark, or say Sweden or Norway or Iceland. It's pretty different, right? Even the energy need of the United States is way higher than energy need of all these countries I mentioned, excluding India and China, right? Because US is pretty big. They got a huge population, like 300 million or something plus. So the energy demand is pretty high, right, compared to New Zealand. Um, so yeah. So now I did briefly mention about the carbon projects, right? So for instance, that company can get involved with the carbon projects, right? Carbon projects can be categorized as, like four parts, as you can see: avoidance, reductions, removal, sequestrations, right? So, for instance, the project like reducing deforestations could be one way of which can be categorized under avoidance. Um, and then you can set up the methane gas capture project at the landfill to be a part of the reduction project. Then you have removal. You have some kind of projects in place which removes emission from the atmosphere. Then you have sequestrations where you can capture and store atmosphere CO2, carbon dioxide. I mean, through technology-based removal. So these are different types of carbon projects. You can get involved. What is the renewable energy, household, uh, forestry and land use, industrial, manufacturing, fuel, transportation, right? So forestry and land use, you can, the projects. that focus on reforestation, afforestation, and conservation of existing forests. People kind of misunderstand, right? They have a misunderstanding about, the trees won't make much difference. They don't make lots of difference, right? Remember that tree takes the carbon dioxide and releases oxygen, right? So it's very important for the survival of humanity, right? To not to destroy the plantation, not to destroy your forest, right? There is a reason why the nature built our planet Earth in certain way, right? Jupiter is different, Saturn is different, Mercury is different, Mars is different, right? Every planet in our solar system is different, right? At this stage, based on our very primitive, limited technology, what we have, we can only prove life only exists on Earth. That does not mean that life does not exist beyond our solar system. We are focusing only on the humanoid looking entities to be categorized as a living entity. There could be entities with no shape and form. Could be an energy source like class 4 civilization, right, which can harness the energy of entire galaxy, right? Because our human mind is very limited. So we think everything in our image, right? So which is not really always the case, or some people assume like the gray looking people, or or the um, humanoid with tentacles. It's not always the case, though, right? You might have advanced civilization in the form of a bacteria or in the form of a virus, right, which can perform a massive amount of damage if they want to do it. So, and or who knows that we have people from different dimensions living around us. It gets into esoteric complications, which I don't want to talk about, right? Because it kills the entire purpose then. So, because you're talking about the net zero, but the reason why I wanted to mention, right, we have this beautiful planet, right? It is our responsibility to protect it. So, getting involved in a carbon project is one of the way you can contribute, right? You can contribute, right? If even if you're not a business owner, help your community to plant some trees, right? Go and join a club which help, with the forestation process. Um, Conservation of existing forests, which is pretty amazing. It gives you so much of satisfaction. And a household device, like few things you can do if you can afford, a sustainable fuel, right? Let's say a biogas, right? And if it's fairly cheaper, then you should go for it. That's another thing you can do, right? The methane capture, like I said, some people do that. Um, and the transportation, most of the um, car manufacturers, they're looking towards electric cars, which they say is good for the planet. Um, so I don't want to get into that more. You might have disagreement with me on that. So let's park it there, right? I'm just saying, right? Try to use the renewable source of energy, or something which is good for the planet. Okay, so that's a carbon. The few examples of the carbon project, right, which you can get involved. You are as a company, business owner, you can get involved in these kind of projects. So how does the carbon credit works, right? So you can invest in a carbon project, like I said, individual or company, located anywhere in the world by buying the carbon credits, right? Carbon credits can be transferable or it can retire. So retired credits can't be transferred. Okay. So the carbon credits is often associated with um, it's a transferable instrument which represent avoidance, reduction, and removal of carbon dioxide. So as you can see, the carbon credit is really important, right? Because it involves three components: how to avoid carbon footprint, or means adding more mesh to the atmosphere, how to reduce the emissions from the air, or how to remove the existing one what we have, right? Um, so it could be certified by the government or independent certification bodies. You need to check that out, right? Just join, which is legit. One carbon credit represent reduction, avoidance, and removal of 1 metric ton of CO2. Okay, so this is what one carbon credit equates to. So if someone asks you, "Hey, you're talking about the climate change. So can you tell me on the measuring unit for carbon credit? So it's just 1 metric ton of CO2. Okay. So this is a nice, pretty picture of the windmill, the place where I live, right in New Zealand. So we got a mountain nearby. So we got a lot of windmills there, right, which is pretty cool. So when the flight lands, you can see the windmills. So my city can get very windy at times, right? Normally, Wellington got a reputation of the windiest city in New Zealand, but at times my town do get very windy, especially during springtime. Okay, so we talked briefly about carbon credit, carbon projects. I hope that's clear for you guys. The reason why we wanted to talk about it before we get into net zero to start, uh, you know, doing hands-on, you should understand few basic stuff, right? That's why it's important for you to understand carbon credit. You might have a discussion with, say, for instance, with your vendor or with your customer, and they'll say, "Hey, explain to me carbon credit." If you don't understand the carbon credit, right, then how are you going to explain to them how to allocate the carbon credit, right? So, so the carbon credit is very important, right? And carbon credit, and they might also ask, "Hey, I have this retired carbon credit. Can I transfer it?" No, you can't transfer a retired carbon credit. Okay, and carbon credit is very useful if you wanted to offset your unavoidable carbon emissions. Okay, all right. So we briefly touched about the net zero, right? You know how net zero looks like, the beautiful interface and kind of things. There are three things you can do with the net zero cloud when it comes to your carbon credit. One is you can quantify your carbon credit, you can avoid your emissions and compensate, right? Okay, let's look at it one by one, right? Quantify your carbon footprint. Okay, what does that even mean? Uh, so you need to take a stock about do a stock take of your emissions and identify the emissions that can be avoided or reduced, right? So I like I said, there might be a scenario where you have unavoidable emissions which you can't really do. In that case, you need to buy a carbon credit to get involved in the carbon project. Reduce or avoid your emissions. So implement practice to mitigate emissions at the source, compensate for residual emissions. So you can buy the carbon credit to compensate the things which you can't avoid, right? So you can buy a carbon credit like you're releasing certain amount of because it took me a while to get my head around it because I used to think what does it even mean, right, to buy a carbon credit and offset it, right? It's like you're buying a currency, and how does it going to impact the planet, right? How does it even going to make any difference? Then I realized, right, when they talk about carbon credit, get involved in carbon project, like let's say you're releasing, a few tons of carbon, metric tons of carbon dioxide using certain processes you have in place, which is unavoidable. You can buy equivalent amount of it, a carbon credit to offset it. It means you can plant more trees, which will suck up all the carbon dioxide from the air and makes the air pure. Or you can get involved in, say, another project, like to go completely um, electric, right? That could be another example. Or use only biogas, right? Renewable energy. So these all are a classic example how you can use the carbon credit. You might hear this discussion when you go for a climate change presentation, not just associated with the Salesforce. This is not a Salesforce topic. It's a general topic which is used among climate change community. I write blog on climate change, so I do get an opportunity to talk to different people. So we talk the same language. It's just the difference is that here we're using Salesforce to express it, Salesforce to measure it, Salesforce to uh, using Salesforce to prevent it. Okay, so that being said, that's all I wanted to cover. This is just a theory session, and in the next episode, we're going to look at how to allocate carbon credit and other stuff, purely hands-on. Okay, so that being said, you guys have amazing Tuesday. Adios.